Thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words. Glad to be here because if you don't know, I'm from California, from San Diego, and I'm glad to be here because I'm way ahead in time zones from anybody submitting a ticket, right? And usually, this is a ticket that would come in, and when I see this ticket, it adds to frustration, a little bit of anxiety, and a little finger pointing of who did what, did you do this, did you do that? But usually it just comes down to someone saying, hey, this user just can't get on Eduroam no matter what we have tried. And to me, when I see that, I go, well, what did you try? Did you try everything? And to them, it's like, what is everything? And it goes back to what Keith was saying, is like this checklist that you need to have, right? And so as you work with end users or even help desk, there should be a checklist that they can go through to kind of help transition this ticket to you if you're tier 2, tier 3, right? And so I'm here to talk about Eduroam, but really it's more about 802.1x. And if you don't know what Eduroam is a pretty simple and secure way to connect to Wi-Fi that is actually being broadcasted across, a ton of universities, right? So if I were in Palo Alto on the Stanford University campus, I would connect automatically to Eduroam. The same way if I was to go onto a university here in London. So I apologize, I didn't do any research ahead of time. I don't know any universities here. But I would be able to connect automatically if they had Eduroam broadcasting. And when I look at Eduroam, because as someone who gets a ticket and says, hey, everything I tried, I couldn't get it to work. And so for me, this goes back to starting the podcast. I was just trying to do a lot of digging and trying to understand how it worked, right? We saw a lot of great presentations earlier about 802.1x. One from Hafida with the nice diagrams of what that connection looks like. And what does that actually look like? Because it's very simplified version of connecting. And so this is a packet capture that I asked someone to do for me while I was at WLPC Phoenix. Because I said, hey, I got to present for another conference. I need Eduroam captured. And they were broadcasting Eduroam there. And this shows not all the frames here because it cuts off at 43 and I didn't want to make it any smaller. But I also included all the ACKs, the RTS, CTS, all of that. And so I just wanted to show all the frames that are included because it's not just the simplified version, right? And this presentation really touches upon EAP TLS, and we'll kind of talk about that as well. And so when we talk about Eduroam or 802.1x, there are a lot of different components to that connection, right? You have your supplicant. The supplicant could be your device, your laptop, your mobile phone that is going to provide the credentials over to an authenticator. And that authenticator is your access point. The access point is kind of that gatekeeper on the network. They need to verify who you are, right? Kind of the same way we came to this conference. We need to verify who you are on your name tag, although someone just gave me my name tag or I picked it up off the desk. But that AP just opens up a port to talk to this authentication server. And usually that authentication server, we're going to use Radius, right? And so these are the three main components to this connection. And for many of us, we should know at least the fundamentals of this connection. And I'll touch upon these if you don't know, right? The AP will be broadcasting an SSID. That SSID, of course, is Eduroam. That's kind of the topic here. And when it's broadcasting, my device, the supplicant, will make a probe request and say, hey, I want to connect to Eduroam. Can you let me on? And the AP says, I got Eduroam, right? So that's the very basics of that connection. And Keith kind of went through that checklist, right? You want to make sure for step one that the SSID is broadcasting right after they hook it up onto the ceiling. Now the next frames, the ones that are important here, I leave the ACK frames on there because that's also kind of an important piece about the connection is that with Wi-Fi there needs to be someone acknowledging that they received the frame. And that's why I like to leave those on there. But now the laptop, and this is a Wireshark capture. You can tell that I've got laptop in the name there, and also access point, and that's because I use an ethers file within Wireshark to just rename the MAC address to make it easier to see. But in this, we have your 802.11 authentication. Now, when I speak to other people on the campus and try to educate them on how Wi-Fi connection works, they always get confused here because they go, oh, authentication. That means user credentials are being authenticated, right? No, this is a different authentication. This is more like the laptop looking at the AP going, Wi-Fi? AP then goes around, Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi. Let's keep moving forward, right? And that's the 802.11 open authentication. One thing to note about open authentication is that in the standard, I try to go through the standard as much as I can to just understand how Wi-Fi works. For me, it's very hard to understand even the standard. So I give a lot of credit to the vendors who actually interpret this and put it in a certain way to make it all work. But open system authentication is really just two messages, and it's basically just success, right? Wi-Fi, success. Wi-Fi, success. And so then we move on to the association. Got the association request from the laptop, and then the response from the access point. And then they'll agree on the parameters, right? If you've got a device that doesn't support some of these parameters, they won't be able to go any further from this. And so those are frame 8 and frame 10. That's what those numbers are in the beginning there. Now, this is when we get into the meat of that connection, the 802.1x connection, right? So 802.1x, there's going to be a transport method to send data across. That's going to be your EAP methods, the extensible, what is it? I already forgot. Extensible authentication protocol? Yeah, see, I don't even remember these acronyms. There's way too many, right? So with the start of 802.1x authentication, you got frames 14 and 16, right? The access point, upon now completing the association, will send an EAP identity request. And so that request will be responded by the supplicant. And if we dive into the frame, here is that first EAP request from the access point. And you can see that the type is identity. It's like, hey, give me your identity. Now the laptop will respond with that identity, and the identity is placed like on that outer layer, but it can be like a dummy or anonymous address. Doesn't really matter here, except that if you're using your username, it actually shows up. And so this is not my user account logging into this network, so I covered it here just so no one can email this person and say, hey, Rowell used this in this presentation. So once that request of that identity and response is done, we move on to frames 18 and 20, right? And I purposely put info short here just to there's different columns that you can put. And as I was doing this, screenshot really quickly, trying to complete this presentation for Matt, I forgot to actually leave out make the whole data show there, the info, but I'll show you in a later slide. Frames 18, then the radius server, the authentication server, will send another message to the AP, which the AP then goes, all right, we can start, right? Let's start the next process. Laptop goes, okay. So on the left, you can see the EAP protocol. And the type there, if you notice, it says EAP, but it wants to use PEAP, right? So EAP, PEAP. And then you've got a field there that says start. It's like, let's start this, dude. EAP, PEAP, let's go. And on the right, the laptop looks at this and goes, nah, I don't do EAP, PEAP, dude. That's not my jive. I'm going to do EAP TLS. How about that? It's more secure, right? EAP TLS is actually the most secure method right now for authentication. You got a mutual authentication with EAP TLS. And there are other EAP methods and other ways. I guess, Keith, you can add some more checklists if you wanted to do different EAP methods and where it could fail. but ETLS requires certificates on both sides, the client certificate and also the authentication server certificate. So then we move on to the next frames. You got 22 and 24, and it's just kind of a repeat, right? So AP then sends another ETLS start. And this time, the authentication server, because what the frames before that was really a negotiation. The server just started off with EP. It probably just had it enabled. And so therefore, the client goes, I don't want to do that. I'm using ETLS as a negotiation. And the authentication server sees that, sends back the info here. And I don't have any PCAPs captured here between the AP and the authentication server. I'm just looking at Wi-Fi frames right now. And so the authentication server sends back that ETLS start message there on the left. And you can now see that the type has changed to ETLS. So now we know that the authentication server says, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And let's start. Can we start? And so on the right side, the laptop is going to respond. It actually says, sure, I'm going to do a client hello. Let's do a handshake on this, right? Special handshake. And you can tell that it's using TLS version 1 there on that. But if we keep moving forward and expand the handshake protocol there under the client hello, you will see it's actually using TLS 1.2. And then you could see things like the cipher suites that it supports, along with the signature hash algorithms that it could use. And so it goes and sends that over to the authentication server. And then we have like a big slew of other frames here, specifically frames 26, 28, 32, and 34, right? A bunch of requests and response going back and forth. And what that really is when I look at the frames, and I'm still using Wireshark to try to understand how 802.1 works over Wi-Fi, I've got the 802.11 standard open. I've got the 802.1x standard open. I had some other standard open, and I was just like, my head hurts. And so let me just see if I can understand this without having to search through, 7,000 pages worth of standards. And so by looking at what this frame here is, I noticed that under the ETLS flags field there, the information element, it says more fragments, right? So what's going to happen here is on these next couple frames, 36 and 38, you're going to see a server hello, which you had the client hello on the previous ones, and now the server is going to start. And because we had those other frames, you can see like it's reassembling these frames together, these packets, and it says this here involves frame 26, 32, and 36. And that's because of the certificate that needs to be exchanged between. It just, if you've got fragmentation enabled, it's just not going to fit within the frame, and so it's got to fragment it, and then it'll be reassembled. And when you look at this frame, under the transport layer security, there's a lot of stuff there, right? And when I'm troubleshooting someone who put in a ticket with such a vague request, right? That was the request, which is, hey, just no matter what, Eduroam doesn't work. And you go through your checklist, you go, is the SSID broadcasted? So user credentials correct if you're using like TTLS, or is the certificate still valid? Those kinds of things. You can try to find in these frame exchanges where the failure might occur, right? What I'm showing you right here is when it's successful. When let's say the validation of these certificates happen, here we have the server hello from the authentication server. It's also adding its certificate. You have the server key exchange because they're going to have to come up with a session key that they could use. And then it's also saying, you too got to give me your certificate. I'm giving you mine, you give me yours. Let's make sure we know each other. And it says, I'm done until you send me your certificate. And so looking at the server hello, when you expand it, there's all this data here. And to be honest, when I'm learning, I don't memorize all these things. I don't know what many of that means. And I tried looking at it through the standard on the plane right here, but I got really sleepy. So I decided to take a nap. And so I couldn't tell you what that meant. But I kept looking. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that means that's a certificate that the server has. And with Wireshark, you could export these details and be able to view the certificate. And what's really happening here is once the client, the supplicant, receives this, it needs to validate that that certificate is going to be used, that it is coming from the right authentication server. And I'll mention one issue that I came across with Eduroam. I was in a meeting and a bunch of network engineers were there, and we all started getting requests about Eduroam not working on campus. We don't manage the Radius server. That's the downside. So there's always other teams you gotta talk to. This part here is where I probably would have seen it fail because we were asked, what changes did we make to make this not work? I'm like, the only changes I know about are RRM changes, but that's automatic and it doesn't really affect Eduroam not connecting unless the client itself doesn't support those channels that RRM put the APs on. And also, is this everybody or is just this one person speaking on behalf of everybody? Because that happens on campus too, right? I'm sure you guys get that where one person has a problem, doesn't talk to the other users, but submits a ticket and says everybody is having this problem. And so when you look at the frames, I would have seen here there would have been a failure because we learned that the certificate had expired on the authentication server. And in a failure like this, we probably wouldn't get any further after these frames because the client would say, hey, the certificate's invalid and wouldn't go any further. And so that's why like doing these packet captures or frame captures, it's actually quite useful. And so here the access point's requesting the certificate from the client. Then of course the client then will respond, also will have more fragments because it's got to send a lot more data. And so this is kind of the expanded view from when I was showing you the full view of all the captures. So now you've got your EAP requests, more fragments, and exchanges going back and forth, right? Same kind of thing from the server, except the difference here is not only do we have the certificate that the client is sending to the authentication server, there is this client key exchange. And you can see the elliptical curve Diffie-Hellman that Phil was talking about and how cool it is. That's cool, I guess. I see the key. That's all I know. I don't go into the details of the elliptical curve. And then you've got the certificate verifier, right? This would be the client saying, yeah, your certificate's good. You're not a fake Radius server. And then what I saw that was interesting was this change cipher spec and also the encrypted handshake message. So really what's happening here at this point is that the client is telling the AP, hey, I'm going to now change ciphers. We're gonna now use an encrypted tunnel to send over communications. And so it's just notifying. And then you have another set of frames, right? 50, 52, and 54. And it always just looks like an EAP request and response. But what's most important is at the end on frame 54, you've got the success. And so when troubleshooting and doing frame captures, I know that 802.1x worked at that point, right? That you got the EAP success. And when I remove all the CTS, RTS, ACKs, and all that, this is what it really looks like. And in Wireshark, there's a lot of great videos out there about Wireshark tips. And so I use some of those tips to put this together. You can even see how long it took to get all the way through. You can see how many frames there are. And then here I have the info long column. So now you can actually see more details there of what kind of EAP frame that is. And of course, after that, we had a talk. Hafida talked about the four-way handshake. I think, Phil, you also talked about the four-way handshake because now this will encrypt that Wi-Fi communication, you'll have your unique key between the device and the access point. And I won't go into that detail here because I knew somebody was going to cover that in this earlier presentations. But the four-way handshake comes after all of the authentication with the Radius server. And so that was my experience dealing with, there's the four-way handshake there on the bottom. So when you troubleshoot, right, and there's other scenarios where I look at this and try to troubleshoot what may have occurred when Eduroam wasn't working. Sometimes I'll see the handshake, but maybe you see more than like a copy of message one. There's like, why is message one being sent twice? Or why am I not seeing message four? And so that's where I know Radius might have worked, but that four-way handshake didn't complete. And maybe there's retries happening on the network. And with Wireshark, you can actually do a 5-minute capture, and then I can actually filter everything just on retries and be able to see what percentage of frames that I've captured are retries versus actual data that should be going across. And so that's another way you can kind of divert with troubleshooting as well. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. But that was kind of my experience with dealing with Eduroam and how I used a frame capture to understand how Eduroam worked on my campus. Other things that I did is capture it elsewhere to see how Eduroam worked, because the other piece that we don't see here when we're dealing with Eduroam, so obviously as a visiting person at another university, your authentication doesn't end at that institution, right? That institution doesn't even know what your credentials are. They don't host the Radius server that you have the certificates for. So that has to go all the way back to your home base. And when you are elsewhere with Eduroam, there's a hierarchy of Radius servers, and it'll just send your request over back home. So there's that also delay in authentication, right? We got to go across that single fiber path across the Atlantic Ocean, then got to cross the United States and land in California somehow, and then make it all the way back. And so those are some of the things to consider, because we do get requests where someone on campus is visiting from London. They say, hey, your Eduroam doesn't work. It sucks. My guys Matt and Mac do better Wi-Fi than you. And then I just kind of sit there, cry, and then go, oh, wait, I see everything. Your Radius server is not responding to your request, right? So my point in this presentation is this is how I learn how Wi-Fi works. This is how I picked up certain ways of devices of how they work. Because we can read the standard, but a lot of times devices or APs don't quite work the way the standard spells it out or the way you understand. And eventually that kind of led to me starting the Clear to Send podcast, where I ended up trying to re-explain whatever I've learned into a podcast format. So if you want to give us a follow, for those who didn't raise your hand at the beginning of the presentation, you can find me here. We're on every platform, and just want to thank you guys for having me.